Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those of you who are on the West Coast. I am Florianne Torset-Bonfillou, Director of Regulatory Education and Quality and Lead Auditor at GMED North America. I've been auditing in the medical device industry for the past 10 years, and I've witnessed both successful and unsuccessful initial audits. The initial certification audit is a major step for manufacturers to access the targeted markets. On today's webinar, we will go over the common pitfalls we are observing during initial audits and that could delay or prevent a company's access to market. This webinar is recorded, but you are welcome to ask your questions in the chat box, and if not answered during this webinar, we will come back to you directly by email. So without further ado, let's get started. The initial audit doesn't start when the auditors are showing up at the manufacturer site, but several months prior to it. Planning is the first key item to take into account. In the next two slides, we will go over the different steps to be considered by a company prior to its initial audit. Some of the preparation activities are to be covered simultaneously. The company has to create a quality system corresponding to its size and activities and implement it. To do so, they can use internal or external resources or a combination of both, making sure its personnel remains involved in the implementation. If requested by regulation, a manufacturer should also build its device technical documentation, for example for the European directives. While developing its quality management system, a manufacturer should choose its certification organization and start communicating with it. Having a documented quality system is not enough to move forward to the certification audit. The company has to show that the QMS is implemented and tools are in place to monitor and demonstrate its effectiveness. This is while monitoring the system that a company will assess its readiness to go for its initial audit. And planning here again is key for a manufacturer to determine when it will have enough conformity evidence to show to the auditors. So once a company has completed all the preparation steps and has decided it is ready for its initial audit, the audit will occur. If your company is going for an ISO audit, it will include two steps. This is not applicable for a CE marking only audit. The objectives of the two steps are different. Step 1 is shorter, and its goal is to evaluate the readiness of the company. It mainly focuses on documentation and doesn't go in the detail of the implementation. The auditor will look at some key items such as quality objectives, internal audits, management review. This audit can be performed either on-site or remotely. A report will be issued at the end of step 1, and a decision regarding the readiness of the company and the possibility to move forward to the next step will be taken. The step 2 is performed on-site, and its objective is to review the documentation and implementation of the full quality system based on the scope determined by the company. All sections of the quality management standard will be reviewed using sampling and interviews to determine conformity. The gaps identified in step 1 are to be answered prior to step 2 and could delay the realization of step 2 depending on their criticity. Both steps' outcome will be taken into account for the certification decision, and some of the non-conformities identified could delay or prevent a positive outcome to the certification audit. We are now moving to the common pitfall that we are witnessing during initial certification audits. This list is not exhaustive, and we have included topics from ISO 13485 standard as well as European directive and Canadian regulation. The following items are often subject to major non-conformities during initial audit. They are split in 6 main subjects: quality system definition, management responsibilities, purchasing, internal audit, product realization, and device documentation. One of the first subjects an auditor is looking at during an initial audit is how a company has defined its quality system. Within this topic, the following discrepancies could lead to major findings, especially when cumulated. The presented scope is not inclusive of all applicable regulations or services. For example, the reference and provisions of the European Directive are missing. All provisions of servicing are not identified while company is performing this activity and requesting certification for it. Or the company has a quality management system based on the QSR and hasn't integrated the ISO 13485 requirements in it. Also, the choice of exclusion or non-applicability clause could be a minor discrepancy or a major one, if it is linked to a regulatory requirement. For example, if a company has excluded design, so 7.3, from its quality system, but its device is a Class 3 in Canada, the Canadian regulation requires design to be included. The applicable regulation is to be taken into account while defining the certification scope. Still in the definition of the quality system, the process approach is a source of several gaps, especially during initial audit. From the identification and definition of all processes, including subcontracted ones, to the presentation of their interactions and monitoring. Auditors know that not all processes will be fully implemented at the beginning of the QMS life. However, how processes are and will be monitored shall be defined. The last two items on this part of the quality system are the quality objectives and the documentation. Quality objectives shall be defined and measurable prior to the initial audit. ISO 13485 is also requiring a number of documented procedures as well as records. Missing procedures or records could be critical to obtain certification. As a side note, this also applies to extension audits. For example, if you are today ISO 13485-2003 certified and you are applying for the 2016 version of the standard, not including all requested procedures from the newest version of the standard could lead to a major non-conformity. The second subject is really close to the quality management system definition. It is the management responsibilities definition. The typical non-conformities identified during an initial audit on this topic are mainly linked to the performance of the management review, which may be planned but not fully completed, or completed but incomplete in a sense that not all requested topics were reviewed. Also, ISO 13485 is requesting a management representative to be appointed, and this should be done prior to the initial audit. The lack of compliance with these requirements shows a gap in the management commitment to the quality management system and could lead to major findings. The third subject we will talk about here is purchasing, and more precisely supplier control. In order for the auditor to audit this process and state on its conformity, critical supplier and subcontractors should be identified, controlled criteria defined and applied, and the records of the evaluation kept. If this step is missing, it not only impacts the conformity of the purchasing process, but it also has impacts on other processes such as design and manufacturing. In addition, control of suppliers is a requirement of many regulations, such as the European directives or Canadian medical device regulation. Next subject is internal audits. The two main findings are linked to non-performance of internal audits or performance of internal audits not covering the full scope of quality system. If a company doesn't implement internal audit, its system is missing the implementation of a mandatory monitoring tool. This would be considered as a blocking point to move from step 1 to step 2 of the certification audit. Next common pitfalls are related to product realization, starting with design when applicable. The product design shall be completed or very close to be to allow an auditor to state on the conformity of the whole section 7.3 of ISO 13485. Non-conformities are issued when verification and/or validations are not completed yet, if there is no plan for transfer, and we will see that in the next slide on manufacturing, or when the risk management file is incomplete. In addition of the ISO 13485 requirements, most of the regulations also request for the device design, when applicable, to be completed to obtain product approval. It is the case for the European Medical Device Directives as well as the Canadian Medical Device Regulation. Still within the section related to product realization, but on the manufacturing side now. The manufacturers are often confronted to a chicken and egg situation here. They need certification to put their product on the market, but need products to obtain certification. Once again, implementation of provisions in place for device manufacturing should be available on audit day. However, for initial audits, validation lots may be acceptable if they allow the auditor to cover the full process. Validation should, however, be completed and provisions for product release defined. Lack of such implementation often leads to major nonconformities against ISO 13485 clauses, as well as regulations when applicable. The last topic of the common pitfalls is mainly related to the applicable regulation requirements, but also to ISO 13485-2016, who is now calling for a device file. When manufacturers are applying for CE marking or ISO 13485 within the CMDCAS program, they are expected to insert the regulation requirements prior to obtaining certification. A missing technical documentation or incomplete answer to essential requirements will lead to a major nonconformity. Elements that are quite often found incomplete, some in link with topics highlighted on previous slides, are the preclinical data, validations, or clinical evaluation report. Also, ISO 13485-2016 is now requiring a device file taking into account the applicable regulatory requirements. We have now gone through the main topics on which major nonconformities are issued during initial certification audits. Hopefully, it will help you getting ready for your upcoming audit, initial or extension. However, it doesn't end here. When nonconformities are issued during an audit, the company is requested to provide an action plan to present what actions will be implemented to fix the issue. This step is very important. We are back to a planning step, this time for actions after the initial audit. The companies have to propose correction and corrective action plans within a realistic time frame, and it should be submitted for all nonconformities. Although they should implement all actions, manufacturers should prioritize on the major findings and then the minor ones. Timely implementation and communication with your certification organization is important to allow a resolution and moving forward towards certification. We hope this will help you plan a successful certification audit. If you have any questions, the chat box will remain open for a few minutes. and we will answer your questions directly by email. You can also contact us at the address you see on the screen, contact@eleni-america.com. We hope to see you back for next month's webinar. Have a great day!